Hi there guys, hopefully you can hear me. I don't think you can see me though. Just bear with me. Oh, there we go. Okay everybody, welcome to the first of my weekly live streams. We're going to be looking at the different papers and everybody's voted this in the last week to look at the different everybody's voted and everybody has asked to start off by looking at paper 3 and looking at the Weimar and Nazi Germany paper to start off with. So hopefully we are going to be looking at the one that you want to be looking at this week, but I'm going to be opening another poll later today so you can vote on the next one in a fortnight's time, but this one's going to take 2 weeks because paper 3 is a big one. So we're going to be looking at questions 1 and 2 today, and then we're going to be looking at question 3 next week. So the paper that we're going to be looking at today is in the description, so if you want to go ahead and download that, please feel free. Also, if you want to print it out and work alongside us, please feel free to do that as well. Anybody got any questions as we go along, please stick it in the chat and I can see what you're doing. And I'm going to make a start as we go. Right. Cool. Right, this is my first doing a live, so you're going to have to bear with me as we go. I've got my comments open and I've got my video open, and we're going to do our best, so you'll have to bear with me. Right, let's get cracking. So, when you open your exam paper, I'm going to flip over to my other camera, bear with me. There we go. There we go. So when you open your exam paper, the first thing you need before you even walk into your exam, the first thing you're going to need in front of you is you're going to need two pens. Why two? Because one always runs out on you. And two highlighters for the same reason. And we're going to use those. So. You will be given an exam paper that looks like this, and a source booklet that looks like this. So make sure that you have been given both of those when you sit down to start answering your exam paper. So we're going to have a look at the source booklet today. So I'll put that to one side, but we will be using that in the next one. Oh, is it audio doubling? Audio doubling. Bear with me then. Let's see if I can put a stop to that. As me thinking, what do I need to do? One sec. Bear with me. I will have a look and see what I'm doing wrong there. That is almost certainly me. Disable. Desktop audio. Let me try that. Hopefully you can hear. Okay, hopefully that will work. You can still hear me, and that has the audio problem. Please let me know if it's still giving you trouble with the audio. Okay. Okay. So. Hopefully that's fixed that audio problem. Right, so you've got your exam paper in front of you. A couple of little things we need to pick out that are really key. So if the I'm going to kind of keep an eye on the chat in case I haven't fixed the audio problem. Hopefully I have. Let me keep an eye on it though. So let's keep an eye. So first thing you need to know, you've got 1 hour 30 minutes to answer this paper. Oh, excellent, awesome source. fix that problem. The first thing is you've got an hour and 30 minutes. This is really nice. So this is up a couple of years ago. This used to be 1 hour 20 minutes. They have increased this, so that's happy days for us. It's at 1 hour 30 now. And there are a couple of things you need to spot on this paper. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this paper because it is hard to read from that distance. So there we go. So the first thing, you need to use black ink or ballpoint pen. So do not take in a blue pen. You will not. It's because the reason for this is because the exams are scanned into a computer and then chopped up and sent to examiners, and I'll kind of explain a bit more about that as we go. But basically you need to use black pens because the way that the computer recognizes it is why you have to use black pens. Then you fill in the boxes at the top of the page, really straightforward, your names and all the details there. That helps the computer. The reason you go into those boxes is it helps the computer to recognize who you are. And then answer all the questions in answer question 1 and then either question 2A or 2B. And we'll go into that in a second. And then all the questions in section B. Answer the questions, all the questions in the spaces provided. There may be more space than you need. So this is because they give you way more space than you need. You don't need to write reams and reams and reams. If I see people asking for more paper, I genuinely think they've written too much. You have written too much. If you're asking for more paper, you've written way too much. You do not have time to rewriting so much that you've written for more paper. And I'll explain why that is. When we go into the longer mark questions, I'll talk about how much to write, but you genuinely don't need to be writing more paper, writing so much that you ask for more paper. Okay, total for the paper is 52 marks. And the marks for each question are shown in brackets. Right. There are marks available on this paper for SPAG. There you go, spelling, punctuation and grammar. But honestly, I always say to people, don't worry about this because there is only 4 marks available out of the total of 52. And there is very little you can do about these marks. You are, generally speaking, going to get about either 2 or 3 marks to SPAG. Unless your answer is a grade 9 or it's a grade 2, you are going to be getting 3 or 4 marks. So it's barely worth worrying about. Right, so we've had a look at our paper. We've got all the equipment we need. Let's jump in and start answering our questions. So we're going to start with, we've got a picture source to get us started off with. So, none of these questions you will have ever seen before. These are questions I've written specifically for this live lesson. So this is quite nice because they're not questions that you've seen in mocks before. They're not questions that you have, you're going to see in your mocks, but they are questions that I have based on the, that they've not come up before. So this is quite useful in that they help you with your revision. So, we've got here, so we're, section A, answer question 1 and then either question 2A or question 2B. So, study source A below and then answer question 1. Source A is a nice easy question, but I wanted to spend a bit of time looking at it. Let me zoom in a little bit because it's a bit blurry. 1 second. There we go. How's that? Okay. So, we've got... Let me just do that. No, that's the wrong button. Try again. There we go. That makes it a bit clearer. Okay, so this is a photograph of Nazi stormtroopers in the German city of Stuttgart. Their banner reads, "We won't tolerate sabotage of the work of the Führer." That's what that banner in German says. And then we've got we've got the stormtroopers marching, and then we've got a couple of pictures that go with it, and there's a guy drinking, there's a man whispering into the ear of another guy, there's a lady kind of like sticking her nose up at people, and then there's the church kind of blessing somebody. So, oh, sorry, move that up a bit. There's a lady there, and there's the man sticking his nose up at people, the church blessing people. So, this is where you are not going to be handing this in. So, what we need to be doing is we can write all over this. So let's have a quick look at our question, and then we can start thinking about what we need to be thinking about in terms of this source. So the question is, give 2 things you can infer from source A about Nazi attitude towards opposition in Germany. So the Nazi attitudes towards opposition in Germany. So it's not asking about what opposition there is. This is kind of crucial. It's not asking about what. It's not asking about what opposition there is, because it's not asking about the White Rose group or the church or anything like that. What it's asking about is what was the Nazi attitudes. So we need to think about what are the Nazis saying in this picture. What are their attitudes towards the opposition? So let's go back to our source. So let's have a think about it. So, well, first of all, the banner reads, "We won't tolerate sabotage of the work of the Führer." Okay, well, that's the first thing. They won't tolerate sabotage of the work of the Führer. So all we can first work out is that they are going to come down hard on any sabotage. So the key thing about the inference question is, if we were just to say they won't tolerate sabotage, that's not an inference, because it just says that in the source. That's just saying what you can see, and anyone can do that. Okay, so what we need to do is take it a bit further and add a bit more. So we're going to say they won't tolerate sabotage. Well, it's stormtroopers. When we say that they won't tolerate something, that suggests that they're going to do something a bit more, right? They're going to be a bit harder. So perhaps we can say they're going to come down hard on people. Now, what do the Nazis do? They're going to be probably pretty hard. They're going to probably arrest people. They're probably going to treat people pretty harshly if they sabotage the work of the Führer. Okay? So that's taking it a step further. So the point is, we can see that they won't tolerate it. The step further is to say that they're going to come down hard on people. What else can we see? Well, we can see that they probably think that this kind of opposition is some kind of threat to the Nazis. How do we know this? Well, because they're bothering to call it out. If they didn't think it was a threat to the Nazis, they're not going to bother making a banner, making this, and then marching in the streets. If they didn't think it was a threat, why bother? Okay, so we can label this as they're a threat. It's a threat to the Nazis. Okay, because we're taking this a step further again. What else can we say about it? We can say that they rely on intimidation. How do we know this? Because they are wearing their stormtrooper uniforms. They've turned out carrying weapons. They are wearing, they've turned up in a group. So they are using intimidation. So remember, this is not getting handed in. So you can write all over it and nobody cares. So feel free. Okay. The last thing I'd kind of point out about this source that we can say is that there is no, I'll just lower my light a bit so you can see a bit easier. There we go. The things that they consider to be threats to the Nazis are quite ordinary things. Somebody being drunk, somebody sort of whispering, like sort of talking about the Nazis, somebody being kind of above them and people worshipping in church. These are just ordinary things, aren't they? So we can say that ordinary actions okay, so now we've picked out those details, we can now take it a step further and we can go over and we can start thinking about answering our question. So what can we infer? Well, we've said that, for example, that the Nazis would come down hard and possibly use violence against saboteurs. I'm going to put that in. I've got to remember how to spell saboteurs. Sabo. I think it's EUR. There's of the state. So I've put that in apostrophes because I don't agree that they're saboteurs, but there we are. Details in the source that tells me this. Well, how do I know this? Because it says their banner reads, "We won't tolerate sabotage." Okay, so it says, I'm just going to quote it, "We won't tolerate sabotage." Okay, so now I need another inference. So what can I infer? I'm going to go with the ordinary actions. So what can I infer? Ordinary actions. Such as attending church, and drinking were seen as threats. Okay, how do I know this? Well, because the cartoon shows ordinary people as cartoonishly acting out bad actions. Okay, so that's really straightforward. But I've used a cartoon one first because I think it's kind of hard sometimes to use use picture sources and to make inferences to go up a step, because it's kind of easy sometimes just to regurgitate what it says. Okay, let's move on and have a look at a text source. Okay, text sources I always think are a little bit easier. So the reason I chose that one, by the way, is because opposition has never come up as opposition against the Nazis has never come up as a question 1. So that's worth remembering. Okay, another one that's never come up as a question 1 is the invasion of the Ruhr. So let's have a look at an invasion of a source for the invasion of the Ruhr. Okay, so this one is from an official French army report of the invasion of the Ruhr entitled "A Year of Occupation, Franco-Belgian Operations in the Ruhr in 1923, which was published in 1924. So it's a nice source written literally around the time, and there's some lovely stuff in here. Passive resistance consisted not of not collaborating in any way with the French and the Belgians. It meant refusing all of their demands and not complying with any of their orders. The post, the telegraph and telephone workers refused to make any communication with the French and Belgians to send their letters and sell them stamps, and so on. Railway workers refused to run the trains and sell the trains needed for the troops. German officials of all ranks pretended to be unaware of the presence of the French and Belgians. The order to go on general strike may have appeared to be patriotic, but it has had disastrous consequences for the German economy and people. Okay, and our question that goes with this is, give two things you can infer from source A about the impact of passive resistance on Germany. So this is our key thing, on Germany. So the impact of it on Germany in 1923. And this is always key. So remember that although this question is quite easy, you need to be looking for what your key terms are here. So we're looking for the impact of it on Germany in 1923. I'm just going to try and clean my lens a bit because I feel like it's a bit... There we go. Hopefully that's a bit better. Right. Okay, so the impact of passive resistance. So let's have a look at this source again. So we're looking for the impact on Germany. So I'm going to pick out a few things here. Again, I'm going to grab my highlighter this time because this is what we brought our highlighter in for scribbling all over sources. So it caused serious disruption to everyday life. How did it do that? I think it did because the post, the telegraph and telephone workers weren't working. So that means that the post isn't getting through. So to my view, that is going to cause impact to everyday life. That means you're not getting your post, you're not being able to make a telegraph, you're not being able to send a telegraph, which remember this is like kind of important in the 1920s, and you're not being able to make a telephone call. So that's an important disruption to everyday life. Also, you're not going to be able to get a train. You're not going to be able to send a letter. Where's the train one gone? They refuse to run the trains. So this is all evidence that it's going to impact your everyday life. It's also going to impact your German economy because you're not going to be able to buy and sell goods. You're not going to get supplies to your shops and so on and so forth. So this is going to have an impact on your economy. So I would say your other one is going to be about your economy. So we're taking these things step by step. People are going to not be able to buy food in the shops. All of these things we're taking each thing. So the trains don't run. Okay. So we can't get supplies to the shops. Okay. That's going to have an impact on the economy. So can you see how we're taking the impact of the trains, then we're then adding it to a line, and then we're taking an inference from there. This is going to have an impact on individual people. So our inferences are going to be, get rid of that sheet because I keep bringing it out and we don't need it anymore. Our inference is going to therefore be, what can I infer? The invasion of the Ruhr, sorry, not the invasion of the Ruhr, the passive resistance. I'm not going to write full sentences. I'm really sorry. That's me, not you. So, sorry. It had an impact because we haven't got time to write full sentences. On people being able to buy food. Yeah, that's a really good question. So it only refused to communicate specifically to French and Belgium. They did. You're absolutely right. But if they are not running the trains, if they are not operating the post, telegraph and telephone work, Samara, that's a really good question. They're not doing all those things, then that is going to have an impact on the general economy. So it is going to have an impact on the economy as a whole. If you are not operating the trains, then the economy is going to be affected, because the Ruhr is the area where they're producing things like iron, coal, all of those things. And so they're not going to be able to get things like coal out to companies who are not going to be able to then operate their factories, and therefore factories are not going to be able to operate. And then if the factories can't operate, then they can't produce things like materials for other things. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, as much as the invasion of the Ruhr, as the passive resistance does, they are only actually refusing to work with the French and Belgians, it does have a massive impact on the German economy. The key thing to really point out about this question, though, is that you can't use your knowledge for this question, and you won't get marks for using your knowledge. So you have to be able to sort of make inferences, even if they're not fully accurate. So I'm going to just put buy goods here, because I am assuming that I don't know anything, because I have to assume I don't know anything, because you don't get marks for knowing anything, which sounds stupid. A few years back there was a question, and it showed all the children dressed in in Hitler Youth uniforms, dressed as if all to go off to camp, and they were all the answers came back with, oh, we're all like, Hitler Youth students, all off to camp, da, da, da. And at first the exam board were like, oh, we can't give marks for them saying they're Hitler Youth. But we had to kind of retract that in the end, because all the students were saying Hitler Youth, because obviously they're Hitler Youth. And it was a real tricky one. But anyway, so yeah, officially you can't say that you know anything, even though you do. So it had an impact on people being able to buy goods. Detail on the source that says that the post, telegraph, telephone. Sorry, my handwriting is appalling. I'm sure you guys have got much better handwriting than me. And trains were not working. So goods were not delivered. Okay, my other inference I'm going to make is that this affected the German economy. Okay, so this isn't the source that tells me. This is the trains were not running. There we go. Okay, brilliant. So that's it. That's literally all you need for question 1. Right. Sorry, I've just realised I've got really bogged down in that. So we're not running. That's literally all you do. You don't need that bit. Sorry, you don't need the explanation. Cool. Right, let's get into question 2. So that's me explaining things, and then I got bogged down in it. Let's get into question 2, which we do need to explain things in, because this is an explain why question. So let me just reiterate before we get into that. Question 1, key headlines. You have 5 minutes to answer that question. So let me just go back to it. You have 5 minutes to answer that question. All you need to do is you need to pick out one thing that you can identify from the source. So for example, it damaged the economy, and then you need to say why was that? Because the trains, it damaged the economy because the trains were not delivering goods. Detail of the source that tells you this. The workers refused to run the trains. That's it. Literally that. So you do that twice, 5 minutes, and then you move on. You can write all over this as much as you like, because you have a this bit does not get sent in. The only bit that gets sent in is this bit, and don't ever write outside these lines, because this line does not get sent in either. So where it says do not write in this area, that bit does not get scanned in. So don't ever write outside that area. But again, you can write all over the question. The examiners don't really care if you write all over the question. That's fine. You can draw boxes and all sorts of things around that. Okay, if there's no questions about that, I'm going to move on if you're all happy with that. Okay, so let's get into question 2, which is a much bigger question. So let's have a look at it. So there's 2 questions here that I wanted to have a look at. Not sure we're going to have a look at both of them, but we'll have a look at one of them. And the reason I wanted to have a look at this first one is because I think it's kind of a tricky one. So the one we're going to have a look at is the explain why the Munich Putsch failed in 1923. So this has never come up as an explain why question. In fact, this has never come up at all, the Munich Putsch. So this is kind of one that is worth having a look at for your revision purposes, the Munich Putsch. It has never come up at all. So, I think the reason it's never come up is because it's kind of a tricky one to ask a question about. It took me a little while to think about how I was going to ask this question. So, explain why the Munich Putsch failed in 1923. You may use the following in your answer. So you've got the lack of support from the army and the police and Ludendorff, and you must use information of your own. Now, one thing I want to point out about this, and I've said this in my video, but it's worth pointing out as well, is that you've got what the first bullet point is always a whole paragraph. Okay, so it will give you the information for a whole point for your whole paragraph. So the lack of support from the army and the police, we can write a whole paragraph about that. The second paragraph is a partial paragraph. It's information to give you a clue. I can't spell today. Partial. Yeah, it's a partial paragraph. So Ludendorff is part of a paragraph. He's not a whole paragraph on his own. So, and that's true. If we look then at the second one, the school curriculum, again, is a whole paragraph on its own. Nazi Teachers League is a partial paragraph on its own. So this is always true. Always true. That's really helpful to remember. Okay? And I'll point out they do this with bullet points when we come to look at the Elizabeth paper, so paper 2 and paper 1. There is always a rule with the bullet points, so I will point this out when we get to it. Okay, so very nicely they've given us our headline of our first point evidence explain paragraph, but I want to start by looking at the mark scheme. So, let's have a look at the mark scheme for this. So, this has changed slightly in the last 12 months. First thing to point out is that they are always looking for causation. So, they're looking for you to explain why the thing happened. AO2, and then your knowledge and understanding AO1. So you get 6 marks for one and 6 marks for the other. Okay. And to get into the top grade boundary for this, you need to give an analytical explanation. So that means that you need to not only give an explanation, but you need to give some analysis as well, because this is a level 4 answer. Now, level 3 answers, which we'll look at when we get to the question 3A, are a lot more straightforward. But a level 4 answer, we need to make sure that we are giving a really good analysis in our answer as well, and I'll talk about that in a second. So it needs to be directed consistently at the question, and have a line of reasoning. So we're not jumping around, we're not talking about one thing and then wandering off, and it's logically structured. We also need to make sure that we have accurate and relevant information. So in other words, it is all of the information you've included is correct, and it is wide-ranging. So what they mean by that, the wide-ranging bit, nice and easy, is that you are using 3 paragraphs. So this is why we tell you to write 3 paragraphs, because paragraph 1 is your bullet point 1, paragraph 2 includes bullet point 2, and paragraph 3 is something of your own knowledge. Okay, so let's go and have a go at writing this. So we've got our question: explain why the Munich Putsch failed in 1923. We're going to use the following in our answer: lack of support from the army and the police. That's our whole paragraph. Ludendorff is our partial paragraph, and then we're going to come up with a paragraph on our own. So the first one we're going to do is nice and easy. We're going to make sure we tell the examiner which one we're going to answer. If you don't do this, it's not the end of the world, but it does help the computer to know which one you are and puts you in the right box. So this is an admin thing. This means that the computer sends it to the correct examiner. It doesn't mean that you will fail if you go to the wrong box. It just means that it takes a little bit longer for it to get to the right examiner. It's not the end of the world, but it's worth making sure you get to the right examiner for your own benefit. Okay, so one reason. We're going to start with one reason. It's always a nice easy way. One reason was, and we're going to start with the bullet point. So that's nice and easy. Where's my bullet point gone? Just going to move it up a little bit so you can see both at the same time. There we go. One reason was a lack of support from the army and police. Okay, so I need to add some knowledge here. So I'm going to include that Hitler assumed if you remember, Hitler assumed that the army was going to back him, his putsch, if you remember, because the soldiers were going to come in and they were going to, if you remember, the soldiers opposed the Weimar Republic quite vocally, and also the police were quite anti-Weimar Republic, and he was expecting them to all sort of rise up and support his putsch. But actually, when it came to it, they didn't, and the police opened fire on him, and which basically immediately put pay to his uprising. But you don't need to go into a great big history of why they hated the Weimar Republic. You don't need to go into a great big history of like what the Weimar Republic was, because the examiner knows that. Okay, and you have to just assume that the examiner knows that. So you need to just go, okay, so Hitler assumed the army and police would support him. Because they hated the Weimar Republic. However, when the Nazis marched through Munich, my terrible handwriting again, the army and police stayed loyal to the government. The police opened fire. Right, and now we're going to use a nice bit of specific knowledge now, which is going to get us that nice little 9. We're going to slide in that specific knowledge. How many Nazis? 16 Nazis. Killing 16 Nazis, which immediately ended the putsch. Okay, so we've got a nice bit of knowledge there. We've added some really specific details, such as the number of Nazis that were killed. All we need to do now is do our little explanation. So I'm going to add in this shows. This shows is always a nice explanation, because what it does is it immediately goes into our explanation. What does this show? This shows that the putsch was doomed, right? It was never going to work because it didn't have the support. Nobody supported it. Hitler was convinced everyone was going to support him, but actually nobody cared. So it was doomed because the Weimar government still controlled, how we do space, let's move it up, still controlled the armed forces. So there's my explanation. This shows the putsch was doomed because the Weimar government still controlled the armed forces. Okay, but I want a 9. I want to get a 9 in this exam, so I am going to put in a bit of analysis. I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to put in a bit of analysis at the end of this, and I'm going to just say, okay, but how important is this factor? And that's the key here, right? So how important is this factor? If this factor hadn't have been a factor, how much of a difference would it have made? And this is the key thing. So I'm going to say, well, without the military backing, how important was, how likely would, how big of a factor was it? I think this is pretty crucial. Without the military backing, the putsch was never going to work. So I'm going to say, without military backing, the Nazis had no realistic chance Looking for space. Of seizing power by force. So that's it. That's my tiny bit of analysis at the end that just kind of moves me up to the difference between just a basic explanation and some analysis. Now, my other points that I would make are going to be focused around that second point, that second bullet point. So I already said to you that going back to that, the Munich Putsch failed in 1923, you may use the following. So we've talked about the lack of support from the army and the police, that being a whole paragraph, and then Ludendorff, it being a partial paragraph. So how are we going to expand that? We're going to talk about leadership. So Ludendorff being part of the leadership and Hitler being the other part of the leadership. So there we go. Sorry about that. Try again. It's because I've only got the sound attached to the one thing. That's why. Sorry about that. Try again. Okay, so let me just show you my notes, so this will help you. So basically, I've gone with the other important reason that the putsch failed was the poor leadership and planning by the Nazi leaders. Let me zoom right in on this so you can see. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. So, oh, it's all wonky. There we go. There we go. Right. So, Hitler and Ludendorff relied on the optimism rather than careful planning. And I think this is absolutely true. So you can't see that bit. There we go. Try that. Okay. There we go. So Ludendorff really believed that his reputation... Ludendorff was very much of the old school of German thinkers, that he believed that he had this kind of right to rule, and he thought that by ruling, that because he had the right to rule, that he could just kind of stomp around and behave however he wanted. And so as a result of this, he kind of thought that his reputation as a war hero would persuade the army to basically behave, to join the Nazis, and that did not pan out. So that's what I'm going to include in my detail. I'm also going to include the fact that the Nazis had no clear plan for taking power beyond Munich, and that once Hitler left the beer hall, the authorities had time to organise a response. So I'm not going into great detail. Again, I'm not giving the backstory. I'm not going into the massive amounts of detail, but I'm just giving the quick details, and then This lack of coordination meant the putsch was disorganized and easily crushed. That's just this meant, okay? Just this meant. That's my key phrase. This meant. Okay? Now for my analysis, highlighting how leadership failures directly contributed to its collapse. So that's my, like, how important is this? How important is this? Well, leadership failures directly contributed to its collapse. And then finally, my final paragraph, my further reason, I'm going to share this at the end. I'll put this in the comments so you can come back to this. I'll also put it on the website, which is which is thehistoryteacher.net, and you can come on, you can go on the website and pick, download it. It's on the main web, on the front page. So how do you decide what? Can you expand a little bit and I'll answer it. So a further reason the Munich putsch failed, this is the last one. I went with the lack of public support. So you could have really gone with all sorts of things here. Was the fact that once they went into a pitched battle, they'd kind of lost the pitched battle. You could have gone with the fact that actually Hitler didn't have any real plans. There's all sorts of reasons why you could go with why the Munich putsch failed, but I'm going to go with the fact that actually they didn't have a clear plan. They didn't have any actual support. So I'm going to go with, in 1923, most Germans wanted stability, because don't forget that the Munich putsch takes place at the far end of 1923. This is at the end when things are just like, they've had enough. Everything's gone horribly wrong. So a further reason why the Munich putsch failed was the lack of public support. Most Germans wanted stability after years of political unrest and economic crisis. The Nazis were still a small party with limited support outside Bavaria, and when the Nazis marched through Munich, ordinary people did not join them or rise up against the government. This shows, again we're back to this shows, it's a really nice, okay, give me 1 second then I will answer that. This shows that the putsch failed because it did not reflect the wishes of the wider population, making it easy for the authorities to isolate and defeat the Nazis. Okay, so that analysis. So this shows is always my, like, this shows or this meant is my nice explanation. And then why is it important? Well, it made it easy for the authorities to isolate and defeat the Nazis. Okay, so this shows, this meant is my explanation. And why is it important? Well, it highlights how, or it made it easy, or without military backing, the Nazis had no chance. Okay, so each time I'm showing why it's important, and then I'm saying why it's important. So I'm showing how it's important, why it's important. Does that make sense, hopefully? So how do I decide if I've included enough information? I would say if you have written more than 3 sentences, you've written too much, is what I would go for when you're deciding whether you've written enough information or not. 3 sentences is far and away enough. And in terms of reasons for 1 paragraph, you are talking about 1 reason per paragraph. So it is 1 reason the putsch failed is this. Here is some information about it. 2 sentences ideally. Then what does that mean? So I'm telling you about, so let's go back to my reason about the poor leadership. So my reason is poor leadership. Okay, here is some examples of poor leadership. My example of poor leadership is Ludendorff believed that his reputation would be enough. That's poor leadership. Okay, not actually coming up with any plans or anything, but just thinking I'm going to be a leader. Okay, and also Hitler didn't really have a plan. Hitler just left the beer hall. He didn't have a plan. That's poor leadership. Okay, so there's my examples of them having poor leadership. Then, why does that mean that was a reason why it failed? So how does poor leadership link to this? Okay, so this meant the putsch was disorganised and easily crushed. That's why it failed. It was disorganised and easily crushed. So how important is this? It's important because the leadership failures led to its collapse. Okay? One reason per paragraph. Do not talk about anything else, and you don't need to talk about consequences. You are explaining why. So consequences is a totally separate skill. This is about explanation. So this is about causation. Is there any other questions about this question? Because I'm quite happy to sit and answer them. Hopefully, this is really, you should spend no more than about 15 to 20 minutes on this question. And if you are taking longer than 20 minutes, you are taking too long. It's only worth 12 marks out of a total 52. So as much as it seems a lot, it isn't. You are just saying, here are 3 reasons why the Munich Putsch failed. And the reason I picked this one is A, because it's never come up on any Germany paper before. And the other reason I picked this question is because there is a tendency to go into storytelling with this question. And to tell the story of the Munich Putsch. And also to start going into the reasons for the Munich Putsch and the things that happened after the Munich Putsch. But you mustn't do that. So don't go into, like, Hitler going to jail or, the reorganisation of the party or any of that, because that's not what it's asking you. This question is quite simply asking you, why did it fail? Okay? So that is what you are going to answer. It failed because. You are not going to go into the why it happened, and you're not going to go into the why, what happened as a result of that. Okay, if that is all the questions, I am going to bring it to a close there. Next week, I'm going to go into the second half of the paper, question 3. We're going to be having a look at, I'm going to give you a little sneak peek just in advance. Let me find the source paper. Hang on, 1 second. I'll show you the sources in advance. You can go onto my website and you can download these in advance of next week's live. So we're going to be looking at religion and going to be looking at question 3 in relation to religion in Nazi Germany. And the question is going to be all about that. So please go and have a look at my website, download all the resources ready for the session. I'm going to be here again at 3 p.m. on next Sunday. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Oh, just before I go, if you need any of the notes, please feel free to download them from my website.